Tate Britain is one of the country's most loved art museums. On the banks of the Thames and a stone's throw from the Houses of Parliament, this gallery attracts visitors from all over the world. And with a collection that includes many masterpieces of British art, it's hard to imagine anybody leaving disappointed. In this series, I'll be staying after hours to piece together the story of modern art in Britain. I'll be exploring landmark works from the 19th century through to the present day and discovering artists who defied conventions and changed the way we think. In this episode, I'll explore how 2 world wars shaped British art and the Tate collection. I'll discover how painters like Francis Bacon and David Hockney brought a new audience to art in the middle of the century. And I'll find out how Tracey Emin created what is still one of the most controversial works in art history. This is Stories from Tate Britain. Since its founding, the National Gallery of British Art had always been known as the Tate. In 1932, it formally changed its name to the Tate Gallery. I'm on my way to meet curator Thomas Kennedy to find out about an artist who was active between the wars, but whose life was tragically cut short. Thomas, what an intriguing picture. I think the only painting I know of a zebra with a parachute. It's by Christopher Wood, who is an artist who burnt very bright, but not for very long.
Yes, this is a painting from 1930, which was one of the last paintings before he died. I think one of the first things we should say is just how utterly bizarre this work is. This weird collection of elements together in one composition creates a surreal work. You have this realistic depiction of the zebra in the foreground beside a raised flower bed against a modernist building. And strangely, in the background, up in the sky, you have this parachute descending, but the body is limp and lifeless. That adds this sort of unnerving edge to the work.
So tell me about Christopher Wood. How did he come to make such a sort of enigmatic, surreal, strange picture? What's his background? Who's he hanging out with?
Yeah, so he was born in Liverpool in 1901, and his father was a doctor, but he flirted with the idea of becoming a practitioner. But upon meeting with Augustus John, he encouraged him to paint. And in 1921, he went to study at the Académie Julienne in Paris. There, he met so many different French artists, including Pablo Picasso, and he really immersed himself in Parisian culture.
So is he successful? You know, he's so keen, obviously, so ambitious, but is he successful in those ambitions? Does he get exhibitions? Are people enjoying his work? Is he getting any kind of critical success?
Yeah, he was very much at the start of his career, I'm sorry to say. That he was showing at the Red Fern Gallery. He'd shown with the 7 and 5 Society because he was great friends with Ben and Winifred Nicholson, of which they were part. And he was preparing in the final year of his life to show at the Wertheim Gallery as well. Unfortunately, he was addicted to opium, and we don't exactly know the circumstances, but one day he was visiting his mother and sister. On the way back, he went to the train station, and in an agitated state, he threw himself in front of a train and unfortunately ended his life.
He seems to be the kind of artist that then, you know, we get sort of interested in their biography, and there's a bit of a legacy after he dies and then falls between the cracks. It feels like this time in the 21st century is the time to seek out artists like Christopher Wood, who are maybe on the margins and now find his work for a new audience.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, he was great friends with Ben Nicholson and Winifred Nicholson, and they went on holidays together to Cornwall, to St Ives, and in a work called Fisherman's Farewell, it's really this homogenous family and him looking from the outside into this family space. He was a bisexual man and had a relationship with Jean Cocteau, but he was very conflicted about this and looked at that in his artworks as well.
You have to be careful not to read a painting too much through the lens of biography, like the picture, you know, speak for itself, but obviously understanding his background, his influences, the circle, the things that were happening in his personal life certainly help us look at this picture and understand where such a strange and powerful image can come from. Because the thing is, this really does stand the test of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And many artists in the early 1930s were looking towards surrealism. And this all culminated in Britain with the International Surrealist Exhibition in 1936, just a few years later, after his death. So it's really interesting to know or think about what could have happened with his practice.
Yeah, it feels sad, doesn't it? It feels like he should have been in that exhibition. This is Autobiography of an Embryo by the British surrealist Eileen Agar. She made this work in around 1933, and it is an incredibly enigmatic painting. It's separated into 4 sections, and there's this amazing kind of decorative relief around the edge. You can see that she's pulling references from all different corners of art history. There's kind of Greco-Roman references with the classical frieze. There's an African woman's head. There's these tiny little putti that maybe have come from the Renaissance at the top of the picture, combined with all of these very flat decorative motifs. It's also the organic world. Eileen Agar loved shells, she loved feathers, she loved things that spoke of ancient time and space, like fossils. And she brings all of that into this picture. But this is before surrealism has really landed in London, as it did with the 1936 exhibition. So Eileen Agar is quite quick off the mark here in developing these kind of ideas. And she would have got a lot of that from her time in Paris, where she was around radical thinkers, people thinking about the way that we think, thinking about our unconscious mind. And that probably led her to start thinking about this kind of subject, the autobiography of an embryo. What Agar is positing is that somehow the embryo takes on not just things through the body of the mother, but through the body of time, through the bodies of cultures and communities, a really radical and forward-thinking thought. I think the thing that's pretty sad about this picture is it didn't really get much of a public outing. It was seen in the 1930s. For some reason, it wasn't in that critical 1936 exhibition. But then it got put away in her attic, and it was only much later in the mid-1980s that the painting came back out again. And I wonder if it's because Eileen Agar was so ahead of her time. She talked a lot about womb magic, about women rising up and there being a kind of new era for civilization, about femininity and softness and a kind of grace. And now we can enjoy this painting at Tate Britain in the 21st century. We can confront this idea of womb magic and think about what it means, and really see this painting as a celebration of life for everybody. We now know that the emergence of new types of art in the 1930s would be cut short. By the end of the decade, many British painters were called upon to become official war artists, some of them for the second time in their careers. One of these was Paul Nash. I'm meeting Emma Chambers to find out more about one of his key works. Emma, Paul Nash is so inextricably linked with war, with the wars, but who was he before he became a war artist? Was he just like an English landscape painter?
Well, he actually started out working more in a symbolist tradition. So he studied at the Slade School of Art, but quickly decided landscape was his thing. And then he worked as an illustrator, really, writing his own poems and illustrating them, inspired by Dante Gabriel Rossetti and William Blake. So his early works are pen and ink or watercolour drawings, quite small scale, but with this idea of a sort of imaginative and emotional landscape.
So he's obviously given a lot of thought to landscape art, what it can be, finding new developments within it, which is one of the reasons why he went on to become such a successful war artist, because he puts all this sort of like deep thought and feeling behind the pictures. And this has been described as one of the best war paintings of its time. Tell us about this picture, Tate Smear.
Well, this was painted in the aftermath of the Battle of Britain in autumn 1940. And it comes from a series of photographs that Nash took at the Cowley Dump, which was where crashed German and British aeroplanes were taken. So that was the genesis of the idea that these crashed planes were almost like monsters which had been taken out of their natural element, the sky, and placed on the ground, where they then became a sea of twisted metal, which Nash described as sort of moving like a tide across the field. So the title Totes Meer is actually German for Dead Sea.
So, of course, NASA's been commissioned to make this. He's an official war artist. So he needs to make a very pointed statement about Britain, doesn't he?
He does. I mean, he worked for the Air Ministry. He was commissioned by them to make paintings relating to aircraft in the war. So before this, there's a series of crashed German Messerschmitts, a series of watercolours that he makes, again, sort of focusing on the idea of them being out of their element in the landscape. So this sort of meshing of an inanimate object and landscape is something that he developed earlier in his surrealist landscapes, and he applied those ideas of sort of objects out of place in what would normally be a pastoral landscape. So was very much both a fantastic artwork, but also a nice piece of propaganda, which was, after all, the intention of the official war artist scheme.
And then what happened to Nash after the war?
After the war, he only survives actually 1 year. He dies in 1946. So we can only imagine what he might have gone on to do, because this was, you know, he transformed, as you said, landscape throughout his career and always was pushing the boundaries of what it could be, whether symbolist landscape or something that was more surrealist in showing the impact of dreams or different realities simultaneously in a landscape. You know, he did a lot of work around Avebury and the megaliths there, thinking about historic structures in landscape, and this was just a further development in using the material of crashed planes to symbolise this uncanny moonlit landscape.
Yeah, well, it's a remarkable picture. Thank you very much, Emma.
No, thank you.
Some of Tate Britain's most popular works were by artists who emerged at a time when the country was recovering from 2 world wars. This was the coming of the age of modernism, and there was no one quite as modern as the next artist I want to look at. This is Francis Bacon. Curator Nicoletta Lambertucci is joining me to discuss one of Bacon's seminal works and how he changed British art in the decades that followed. Nicoletta, lovely to meet you. Francis Bacon, this towering figure of British art. And this painting really kind of announces his arrival on the London art scene. 3 studies for figures at the base of a crucifixion. I mean, it's incomparable.
Yes, well, critic John Russell said that there was painting in England before the 3 studies and painting in England after the 3 studies.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with him. Yeah.
And no one could confuse the two. Bacon himself said, "With this work I began." So this work was exhibited in 1945 on the first week of April in a group show at the Lefebvre Gallery here in London. It caused total consternation. People didn't have a language to describe a work like this. We have to imagine in the same month, Hitler committed suicide, Mussolini was hanged upside down in Milan, President Roosevelt died, but in England, there was this feeling of people didn't really want to believe that there was some irreducible evil inside human beings. But then they saw this, these 3 really scary figures.
Because, I mean, it's even hard to read it. Doesn't matter how many times you see it, it's still a shock. I felt shocked again when I saw it today. Are you looking at humans? Are you looking at beasts? It's so confronting. There's almost no language around what this is.
You're right, Kate. What Bacon achieved is this combination of great technical skills with pure intuition. And there is something about creating images that are completely on their own. But what Bacon identified in the work and said several times was that these bird-like figures were actually the vengeful Greek Furies, who were this creature that were thought to avenge those that went against the natural order. So again, there is clearly a profound connection to what was going on in the world at that time. And the mouth itself is a very important element. This theme of the scream can be seen both from a point of view of the perpetrator, but also can be the scream of the victim. So I think Bacon was really trying to look at that from both perspectives.
And do you think that partly the reason that we see Bacon as this almost sort of gateway to this explosion in modern art in this country is because of the time in which this painting was unveiled, the climate in which people are seeing it, thinking about Bacon as the person who's really confronting this sort of godless world that we found ourselves in?
He was certainly confronting that, and as I said, this element of the scream keeps returning and is certainly related to those speeches that we see in Mussolini and Hitler. But at the same time, I also feel that this almost visceral quality of these images, we're really talking to a level of, as you would call it, I want images to come out of the nervous system.
Yeah, he talked about sort of painting the brutality of fact. I mean, he was a very sort of famous subject. People wanted to talk to him, interview him. He was on TV a lot. He was an artist that the country knew, a living artist. How do you think that helped shape his persona, the fact that he was quite candid and really articulate about talking about difficult things?
Well, as you say, he was incredibly articulated, but also he was an exceptional communicator. He loved talking about himself and was very good at it. He also mined modern media, and he really knew how to manipulate that. So ultimately, I think that his exposure to television and interviews helped create the myth without taking away the mystery of the artist.
I mean, I think that all the artists looking at Bacon at this time and for decades afterwards realised that something had shifted in art. There was a bit of a reckoning. Wow, it's staggering. Thank you so much, Nicoletta.
Thank you.
Another artist making waves in the years after the Second World War was David Hockney. Like Bacon, he was interested in place, but by the 1960s, his art was popping with the colour and life of a new continent. This is A Bigger Splash by David Hockney, painted in 1967. It is a real icon of Tate Britain, and it's one of David Hockney's most famous and beloved works. Hockney paints this as a young man. He's left a kind of post-Second World War Britain, grey, drab, and he heads off to California. And there, he says he found the promised land. And this picture really conjures up an idea of a totally different lifestyle. It's this fantastically sun-drenched landscape. There's a fabulous pink modernist building in the background, a beautiful swimming pool, and a big splash. It's completely devoid of people, but yet we feel the presence of someone or something because there's this big splash. Something has just happened, and this splash has been forever suspended in time by David Hockney, who has painstakingly painted it. It's interesting to think about art history at this point because in the States, people like Jackson Pollock and the abstract expressionists were throwing paint around. It was all about gesture and expression and action and the stuff of paint. But David Hockney's not giving us the stuff of paint. His picture is very restrained, it's cool, it's graphic, it's very heavily relying on a photograph, and he's using very fine paintbrushes to paint this splash, so totally in opposition to what was happening in American art at that moment. And as a consequence, you have this amazing tension in the painting. You feel like it's very believable, but at the same time, it feels stylized, or maybe it's taken from a movie or a magazine. It's pop, it's looking at popular culture, it's looking at the way that we absorb images in an everyday way. I mean, is there a cooler painting from the 1960s? I can't think of one. For me, this is it. Like Francis Bacon, David Hockney was the subject of various television documentaries. They were charismatic and became as iconic as their works, if not more so. You had to dig a little bit deeper to find women artists making work in the 1960s. In fact, it's only now that their artwork is getting the recognition it deserves. I'm going to speak to curator Hilary Flo about Pauline Boty, a pop artist well ahead of her time, but sadly overlooked. Hilary, for me, Pauline Boty has been one of the most exciting rediscoveries that's happened during my career. Tell me who she was and if you're excited too.
I'm so excited to have this painting by Pauline Boty in our collection. Pauline Boty was one of the most important pop artists of the 20th century, one of the only women to be at the forefront of pop art in this country. And this is arguably her most famous painting. She emerged as part of this famous generation of artists studying at the Royal College in the late 50s, early 1960s. David Hockney, Derek Bochet, Peter Blake, artists who surround us in this room, who were fascinated by pop cultural imagery and felt that incorporating it into their art, reflecting on it, critiquing it, celebrating it, playing with it, disrupting it, all of that could change what art was and how we relate to it. And so here she's looking at Marilyn Monroe.
And it's really exciting to have this particular painting on display, really because of the subject matter. I mean, Marilyn Monroe. When is this painted? What do you think Boty's saying? Where's the imagery drawn from? I mean, I could talk about this forever. I think it's such an intoxicating mix of this sort of strident, fabulous woman artist and then this icon of the 20th century, Marilyn Monroe, and all of the connotations of that.
It's incredibly rich, isn't it? It was rescued from the skip, essentially. I mean, she was so under-recognised after her death that they nearly threw them all away. It was painted in late 62, early 1963, in the months right after Marilyn's really shocking early death. It is Marilyn as filtered through the mass media. This is not Pauline Boty attempting to give us a kind of privileged behind-the-scenes view of the icon. She's celebrating her as a packaged icon. And I think the way that the painting is constructed with these huge green, almost panels on either side of her means we only get a sliver of Marilyn. We're not given full access to her. She's kind of cropped off to the side.
It gives the painting such an incredible tension. I mean, her leg's obscured here. One leg's really undone as well when it's painted. I always love the way that Pauline Boty sort of allows paint to almost dissolve on the surface. You think, where's the person gone? They're kind of coming and going. So there's this almost like spectre-like quality to it.
Yeah, the brush strokes are so expressive. There's a real looseness and freedom to the way she's applied the paint around Marilyn. So even though she's drawing on a photographic source, here she's really sort of filtered that image through her own expressive, painterly vocabulary. And it brings this huge sense of emotion and dynamism and energy. I think in this painting, she shimmers. And that's a real tribute to how Pauline Boty saw her.
Pauline died very young in really tragic circumstances. She was starting to make political work. She was starting to make traction with her art. She was selling her art.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened if she hadn't have died?
I think if she'd lived, it would have been impossible to write her out of pop art in the way that was done for so long, because she would have been making art and advocating for herself and taking up space, and she wouldn't have allowed us to kind of forget about her for so long.
There is at least some comfort in seeing a great Pauline Boty painting with across the way from David Hockney and Peter Blake. You know, these were her peers.
Yeah.
Exactly, the people that we sort of laud as the great British pop artists. I mean, for me, she's sort of the grand dame of British pop art.
Yeah.
Long overdue being recognised.
Long overdue.
As well as one of the finest painting collections in the country, Tate Britain is also custodian to images by some of our greatest photographers. Vanley Burke was born in Jamaica in 1951 and arrived in Britain in 1965. He settled in Handsworth near Birmingham and began to record the Black British experience.
Coming from Jamaica in 1965, there was a bit of a culture shock. The landscape was so different. There were so many buildings, and they were so close to each other. We came to Birmingham, where my parents had a shop in Handsworth. I bought a little camera, and I sort of converted the parts of the cellar into a studio, a bed sheet and a couple of lamps. And I went to evening class and things like that, started to do that. I describe Handsworth Park, if you like, as the front room of the community, really, where an event that can't take place in your house, your back garden, or anywhere similar, things that are much bigger takes place in Handsworth Park. And over the years, we've had carnivals, Marcus Garvey celebrations, and many others. And on this occasion, a sound system had set up, and I managed to take this photograph there. I did realize that it was an important time. What was being reported in the press in general was not the life that I was living, nor was it the life of people around me. And I felt it was quite negative. Of course, there was a lot of racism around at the time. There were quite a few self-help organizations, groups around. And yes, I remember thinking that if history was to be written, then we have to participate in the process of writing that history. Photography is writing with light, and therefore, if I'm going to write something, then, photography is just as good as anything else. Some photographs lend themselves to title. The Outrider, I refer to this one as, and this was African Liberation Day, 1977, Handsworth. And it's an occasion when a group of, African, Caribbean, in particular, people from around the country meet to address issues of concern to them. What was happening at the time, young people, and in particular young men, were being ostracized by, the community. They were being picked on by police and authorities. And so I kind of felt they were very much in no man's land. They were in a seesaw, really. And so when I saw this, I thought, wow, so I ran and got my camera. Over the years, having had exhibitions at numerous venues around the country and elsewhere, you realize the importance of the work to be seen beyond the local community and to be in collections that will reflect the work on a more historical basis. And so, yes, I think it's important that these are in collections, and the Tate is, representing, as it does, the country's collection. I think it is quite important that this photograph resides there.
Another of those young artists arriving in Britain from the Caribbean was painter Frank Bowling. Where Vanley Burke portrayed life as it was for his generation of emigres, Bowling's world was altogether more abstract.
Frank Bowling is now in his 90s, and he's enjoyed a long, illustrious career. In 2005, he became the first black artist elected as a Royal Academician. But the painting behind me dates from just shortly after his graduation from the Royal College of Art. And it's a fascinating picture because it tells us about Frank Bowling's relationship with painting, the stuff of paint, as well as a critical point in his career. I always describe Frank Bowling as a painter's painter, in that he's the kind of artist that painters want to look at. They want to see the way that he pushes paint around. Paint isn't just a medium, it becomes part of the subject of his work. It's a painting full of dualities. Frank Bowling's showing us opaque paint, thick impasto, flat passages of colour. And then he also shows us these wonderful translucent, almost ghostly-like types of painting. Even his use of colour is very disparate. He's using gold paint, which you would normally find on Renaissance altarpieces, and here it's in this young man's painting. But he's also using bold, strident colours against these pastel, more muted, organic tones. There's a constant sense of things being juxtaposed against one another, and it gives the painting a kind of sense of urgency that he's playing and experimenting. And this work does have a very particular subject. It's recognisable, and that's the spiral staircase from his art school. It's a very real place, and you can see he's using it as almost a piece of autobiography. So there's a portrait of him at the bottom. In the middle is a portrait of his then wife. And then at the top, there's a third figure, which is a kind of strange, slight removal from Frank's self-portrait at the bottom. And that figure represents a kind of tumultuous period in Frank Bowling's life. He's a young man, he's wrestling with a kind of art establishment that's not ready for a black painter of his talent. And he's also wondering about himself and where he is in space. And actually that figure looks like it might bring the whole staircase toppling down. Soon after finishing this painting, Frank Bowling would relocate to New York, where I think he felt there was more opportunity for him. And in this painting, there's this fantastic legacy of an artist who's fascinated by the stuff of paint. And it's that fascination that sees him go on to have such an interesting career, constantly pushing at what paint can do and what it's for. Another contemporary of Frank Bowling was Derek Jarman. Jarman was a Renaissance man of almost Leonardo proportions. He was a painter, a writer, a filmmaker, a gardener, as well as an activist for gay rights.
Jarman's archive is now held here at Tate Britain, and I'm going to meet archivist Adrian Glue and conservator Jacqueline Moon to discover more about a truly groundbreaking artist.
So Adrian, this is the Derek Jarman archive, one of my favourite artists, a really important artist. Tell us about him and about his archive.
Well, Derek Jarman was not only a filmmaker, but also an artist. He went to study fine art at the Slade in 1964, and then had an exhibition in the Young Contemporaries exhibition at Tate in 1967. But also he was a set and costume designer, worked for Freddie Ashton, John Gielgud and Ken Russell on 2 of his films. It's extraordinary. At the moment, we only have an inventory of the collection, but it's around 2,500 to 3,000 items, individual items. It comprises correspondence, a lot of fan mail, for instance, photographs, photo albums, 3D items like the Super 8 camera, the BAFTA, garden books, diaries, and workbooks.
And the workbooks, Jackie, I mean, this is Derek Jarman working things out, like Derek Jarman scrapbooks. What kind of problems do they pose for you as a paper conservator? He didn't make them for the Tate, he made them because he needed to make them.
Absolutely. So they're quite interesting volumes. He spray painted them all gold, and we could tell that because when we opened them up, we could see there was like a marbled effect. So they are originally photo albums, and he's reappropriated them.
Jackie, could we have a look at one of his workbooks?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we do when we look after a collection like this is that we think about how we're going to store it. So one of the senior technicians in the team has basically designed a box, a bespoke box for this work. So we've got an inner tray here.
This is very nifty design.
So we don't need to pull at the spine or the foredge or anything to take it out. And then it means then that the book can be viewed like this, but we can also place it on some book wedges so that we can actually look at each individual page without putting any pressure on the spine.
So this is his working out. Is this for one of his films?
Yes, it's for Edward II.
We've got press clippings there about Cliff Richards mixed in with early script drafts. I mean, it's...
And photographs.
Yeah, trust Derek Jarman to have such beautiful handwriting.
Yes, absolutely. So you can see that that's one of the challenges we hear, because the paper's really thin. It means when you turn the pages, you have to think carefully about how not to crease them.
So if you're a Derek Jarman fan, you can come in and ask to see this archive. It's for everybody.
It will be for everyone once it's catalogued. At the moment, we're having to rely on the inventory to answer inquiries. But if there's something specific someone wants to see, we'll try and attempt to find it for them and bring it out into this room for them to consult. We're open to all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about the enjoyment of artists and their work.
So you've got to be thinking about how to make sure this is still in really good nick in 500 years' time.
Exactly, yes. Yes, it will definitely outlast me as well, though. That's a good thing to know.
I've seen how the collection here at Tate Britain tells the story of modern art in this country.
Of all of the landmark moments in the journey, perhaps none are more radical or controversial than that which occurred in the last years of the 20th century.
In 1998, I had a complete, absolute breakdown, and I spent 4 days in bed. When I eventually did get out of bed, had some water, went back, looked at the bedroom and couldn't believe what I could see. And then I saw the bed out of that context of this tiny, tiny bedroom, and I saw it in just like a big white space.
Andrea Schleicher is a curator at Tate Britain. She explains about the arrival of Tracey Emin's bed on the art scene. Exhibited as part of her Turner Prize nomination in 1999, this transformed British art.
Tracey Emin is a British artist who came to prominence in the 1990s, and she's made an incredible journey from rebel, provocateur, enfant terrible, to now a kind of national treasure who has even been awarded a damehood last year. My bed came about during a particularly sad and difficult emotional time for Tracey. She was 35, she lived in a council flat in Waterloo, and spent 4 days and nights in the bed without leaving the house. She didn't eat, she just drank alcohol. When she emerged from this difficult mental state, she looked at the bed and felt it was a work of art. So she didn't, like most artists, have an idea and then create a work. There was a situation in her life which became a work of art. It's a still life, but also a self-portrait. The reaction to it has been a kind of media storm. The press felt that it was solipsistic, narcissistic, even called it boring. But that was outshone by the audience reaction, some of whom, of course, also felt, I could do that, what is this? But very soon, people were really touched by the work. They found it very relatable because it spoke so honestly about very raw emotions. And that has become very much the hallmark of Emin's work. I would say Tracey Emin is definitely within a lineage of key British artists who have also pushed the boundary, and she feels a real kinship with them. She showed my bed first with Turner in Margate, then with Blake in Liverpool, and then with Bacon here in London. So these are all three artists who were breaking the mold, not following the norm, and also expressing pain. And I think that is something that's a key theme in all of Emin's work, is this articulation of emotional pain. The raw emotions are undimmed, and it's still as powerful as it was when it was first shown.
The late 1990s saw the arrival of another artist engaging with the world in a new way. Chris Ofili's painting was part of an exhibition that won him the Turner Prize in 1998. But the significance of this work transcended the art world, as Dominique Hayes-Moore is meeting me to explain.
Dominique, this is an incredibly powerful painting. Can you tell me about the climate in which Chris Ofili made it?
Yes, it was a very important decade in the art world. So you had the young British artists suddenly bursting onto the scene, and at the same time, the political and social setting was extremely eventful and tumultuous. So it was the end of the Thatcher era, and then in 1997, New Labour came into power, and in 1993, the teenager Stephen Lawrence was murdered, and when the new Home Secretary came in with the new Labour government, he commissioned a judicial inquiry into the police handling of this murder. So it was in this moment that Chris Ofili was making this particular painting.
Tell me about Crisafulli. What kind of artist was he? How did he sit within the kind of fever of the YBA era?
Yeah, well, he was born in 1968 in Manchester, grew up there, and then at the beginning of the 90s, he was at the Royal College of Art, but he was painting, and many of his peers were not painting, and really thinking about the black image, particularly how women were represented in culture and media.
So this work's called No Woman, No Cry, and actually you can see the title in the work visually depicted. Can you tell us about its subject matter?
This is Doreen Lawrence, now Baroness Doreen Lawrence. And of course, it's not a portrait. It doesn't look like her. We know her image from the press and her tireless campaigns for justice and reform of the police. So in that way, it's both Baroness Lawrence, but it is also about all mothers, particularly black mothers, and grief. So it's about a very specific tragedy, but it's also about the most universal experiences.
And it's an incredibly complex image, lots of layers, and actually in the tears, you see Stephen Lawrence's face.
Yes, so every single tear has Stephen's face within it. You know, it speaks to how his image was reproduced so much in the media after the shock of his murder, but also during the long, drawn-out campaign for justice.
What kind of legacy do you think Crisafulli has for the next generation of younger artists in Britain? I mean, he was obviously an artist who created his own style, came out of this extraordinary period of art history, the 1990s in London. But now we've got a new generation of artists, and a lot of them have activism at the core of their work.
Yeah. In many ways, he really showed that painting could be about the black experience, the politics of the black experience. But this one stands apart in recognition of one particular individual who's so important to that decade and continues to be important to British history.
Yeah, it's a really important work. Thank you, Dominique.
Okay.
With the turn of the 20th century, the Tate continued supporting contemporary artists, acquiring new works. One of the artists whose work was nominated for this year's Turner Prize is Pio Abad. He works closely with his wife, Frances Wadsworth Jones.
Frances, Pio, thank you so much for being with me. We're at the Tate, you're artists. Tell me, what does it mean when you walk into these doors? What kind of things go through your mind?
I feel really strongly that, as artists, we're witnesses to things, and all of these sculptures, paintings, drawings are just incredible witnesses to all these histories that have unraveled, that have repeated, or that keep happening.
And Frances, what about you? I mean, you've got the great privilege that you're in a relationship together, so you get to come in and maybe have conversations that other people don't get to have in couples, since you're so art-saturated, creative people.
Yeah, true. I mean, growing up in London, Tate Britain was the only Tate. So coming here in the 90s, it's kind of where I formed my first ideas of what it might be like to be an artist and what contemporary art is.
And tell me about your work and the ways in which you work together. It's very multifaceted, it's complex, but there is also something about it which has a beautiful brevity and a through line. How would you characterize it?
At the core of it, really, for us, is using art as a way to tell stories. And these stories are often stories that have fallen into the cracks of official narratives, stories that are maybe a bit too painful, a bit too uncomfortable to be told as official history. So as artists, we find these gaps, and the work we make kind of fill these gaps and kind of expound on them.
And can you tell me a bit about the collaborative piece that you've made together?
Yeah, sure. So we've been collaborating for about the last 5 years. Pio's Turner Prize show starts with a collaborative piece, which is a giant concrete sculpture, which is a reimagining of a bracelet that was once in the collection of Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos. But we've reimagined it in concrete and kind of related it to the bodies of all of those that their regime touched, basically.
Yeah, it's also, I guess, jewelry, but reimagined as ghosts or reimagined as effigies. So much of the work we do hovers between that gap between what is evidence and what is, I guess, ghosts. And often they occupy the same space.
So I've been charting the story of British art history through Tate Britain's extraordinary collection. And I have to ask you two if there are artists in this collection that mean something to you, maybe unexpected names or people that you come back to you still find something in.
There's one work that I always visit first, almost as a kind of pilgrimage. And it's this painting by Paul Nash called Toad Smear. It just has this quiet power that I think grabs me. You know, when you think about history painting, often you think about like action, but with this painting, there's a lot of stillness. And, you know, when we were installing the show, I couldn't believe that our work is adjacent to, I think, you know, one of the most incredible kind of British paintings that's, you know, that exists.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps hearing your perspective on it because, you know, I'm here as an art historian pulling out all these stories. I mean, that painting's over 100 years old, and here we are standing here today, and artists are constantly finding new things in these works. What about you, Frances?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a pinch me moment that, you know, these paintings that have kind of lived in your head, or these artworks for so long, and then now you kind of get to sit beside them and become part of that history. And yeah, it's pretty magical.
Well, it's really wonderful to see it with you and see it through your eyes. Thank you so much, and congratulations on your Turner Prize nomination and the beautiful work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
In this series, I've seen how Tate Britain offers a unique insight into how modern art developed in Britain. What links all these artists, from William Blake to Pio and Francis, is a laser-like focus on self-expression. Sometimes this is spiritual, sometimes it's social or political, but it's always personal.
And what really excites me is that this building still buzzes with the same energy as when it first opened its doors. And long may that continue. This time and for decades afterwards, realised that something had shifted in art. There was a bit of a reckoning. Wow, it's staggering. Thank you so much, Nicoletta.
Thank you.
Another artist making waves in the years after the Second World War was David Hockney. Like Bacon, he was interested in place, but by the 1960s, his art was popping with the colour and life of a new continent.
This is A Bigger Splash by David Hockney, painted in 1967. It is a real icon of Tate Britain, and it's one of David Hockney's most famous and beloved works. Hockney paints this as a young man. He's left a kind of post-Second World War Britain, grey, drab, and he heads off to California. And there, he says he found the promised land. And this picture really conjures up an idea of a totally different lifestyle. It's this fantastically sun-drenched landscape. There's a fabulous pink modernist building in the background, a beautiful swimming pool, and a big splash. It's completely devoid of people, but yet we feel the presence of someone or something because there's this big splash. Something has just happened, and this splash has been forever suspended in time by David Hockney, who has painstakingly painted it. It's interesting to think about art history at this point because in the States, people like Jackson Pollock and the abstract expressionists were throwing paint around. It was all about gesture and expression and action and the stuff of paint. But David Hockney's not giving us the stuff of paint. His picture is very... it's only now that their artwork is getting the recognition it deserves.
I'm going to speak to curator Hilary Flo about Pauline Boty, a pop artist well ahead of her time, but sadly overlooked.
Hilary, for me, Pauline Boty has been one of the most exciting rediscoveries that's happened during my career. Tell me who she was and if you're excited too.
I'm so excited to have this painting by Pauline Boty in our collection. Pauline Boty was one of the most important pop artists of the 20th century, one of the only women to be at the forefront of pop art in this country. And this is arguably her most famous painting. She emerged as part of this famous generation of artists studying at the Royal College in the late 50s, early 1960s. David Hockney, Derek Bochet, Peter Blake, artists who surround us in this room, who were fascinated by pop cultural imagery and felt that incorporating it into their art, reflecting on it, critiquing it, celebrating it, playing with it, disrupting it, all of that could change what art was and how we relate to it. And so here she's looking at Marilyn Monroe.
And it's really exciting to have this particular painting on display, really because of the subject matter. I mean, Marilyn Monroe. When is this painted? What do you think Boty's saying? Where's the imagery drawn from? I mean, I could talk about this forever. I think it's such an intoxicating mix of this sort of strident, fabulous woman artist and then this icon of the 20th century, Marilyn Monroe, and all of the connotations of that.
It's incredibly rich, isn't it? It was rescued from the skip, essentially. I mean, she was so under-recognised after her death that they nearly threw them all away. It was painted in late 62, early 1963, in the months right after Marilyn's really shocking early death. It is Marilyn as filtered through the mass media. This is not Pauline Boty attempting to give us a kind of privileged behind-the-scenes view of the icon. She's celebrating her as a packaged icon. And I think the way that the painting is constructed with these huge green, almost panels on either side of her means we only get a sliver of Marilyn. We're not given full access to her. She's kind of cropped off to the side.
It gives the painting such an incredible tension. I mean, her leg's obscured here. One leg's really undone as well, when it's painted. I always love the way that Pauline Boty sort of allows paint to almost dissolve on the surface. You think, where's the person gone? They're kind of coming and going. So there's this almost like spectre-like quality to it.
Yeah, the brush strokes are so expressive. There's a real looseness and freedom to the way she's applied the paint around Marilyn. So even though she's drawing on a photographic source, here she's really sort of filtered that image through her own expressive, painterly vocabulary. And it brings this huge sense of emotion and dynamism and energy. I think in this painting, she shimmers. And that's a real tribute to how Pauline Boty saw her.
Pauline died very young in really tragic circumstances. She was starting to make political work. She was starting to make traction with her art. She was selling her art.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened if she hadn't have died?
I think if she'd lived, it would have been impossible to write her out of pop art in the way that was done for so long, because she would have been making art and advocating for herself and taking up space, and she wouldn't have allowed us to kind of forget about her for so long.
There is at least some comfort